Myers. Okay, yeah, we're going. Hi, my name is Ben Myers. Some of you guys will recognize me from having only graduated like a semester ago. Um, I am a web developer for USAA. I work in a framework called React, which is a framework for JavaScript. I'll explain. My goal today is to kind of explain like what React is, and also get you guys kind of rolling on creating your first React application. Um, if you have any questions, the fastest way to get a hold of me is Braden has a phone that currently is streaming directly to my hearing aid. That's probably your best way of getting a hold of me, because I can't guarantee that I'm going to check the chats on the YouTube stream. Cool. So, the first thing that we're going to need to do, I believe you guys should have been told earlier to install. Oh, yeah, I was looking up clip art. You guys should have been told earlier to install Node.js. This is a runtime environment for JavaScript. JavaScript as a language was initially designed to be run in browser, and so it's kind of consigned to that special space. But if we want um, if we want to just be able to run JavaScript as a client on our own machine without the need of a browser, then we need Node for that. Node is also going to give us access to the NPM package manager, which is what we're going to need to install some of our dependencies today. So if you haven't already, go to nodejs.org and just go ahead and install Node. I would recommend the 10.14.1. If you did the 11.3.0, then that's totally fine as well. Just, I doubt there's going to be any difference at all. So I'm going to let y'all have some time to install that real quick. If you need, I'm going to talk just at a high level about what React is and what it's for, why it was made, and hopefully that will give you guys some of the context as to why some of the code that we're going to write soon is the way it is at all. So Node was created by, or sorry, not Node, React was created by Facebook. And if you think about Facebook, they're actually a really good use case for what this is, right? You log into your Facebook profile, and you're greeted with a news feed. And what is a news feed but a series of posts that all have a similar structure to them, but all have dynamic content and maybe need to adapt a couple things here and there. But overall, they're the same basic idea, right? One newsfeed post is akin to another newsfeed post is akin to another, right? And that same kind of idea follows to other pages on Facebook. For instance, your actual profile page is the similar kind of thing. You've got your little banner at the top that specifies who you are, has a lovely profile picture and a cover photo, but then you also have a series of posts, right? And once again, those are all going to have a fairly consistent structure to them, but dynamic content. And so this is what React is for. It's to kind of speed up that process by introducing something that it calls a component. Now, I know that because I went to the same CS program as you guys are all familiar with Java and the way that Java does object-oriented programming. And that's actually really helpful for understanding kind of how React does stuff. A React component is a class in pretty much the same sense that we would talk about class in Java. It's a class that represents a chunk of the UI. So a component is going to contain HTML elements, and also it can contain other components if you'd like. So it can be a mix, right? So we can envision for this case where we've got the Facebook newsfeed up here, we've got one greater like newsfeed component, and inside it has a series of post components that each handle each individual post, and maybe there's like a create a post component for this box up top, right? And so you can kind of start to envision how this would break down your application into a tree of components with other components inside them, until it all comes down to the barest bones HTML elements. So that context is, I think, really important for understanding the code that we're going to be writing so far. At this point, do we have any questions? I'm just going to pause right here. All right. No questions so far. Awesome. So now what we're going to need to do is in your terminal, hopefully at this point you've got a version of your terminal that is equipped with Node. Hopefully that's all installed. So we're going to run the following command, and I've actually got typed up here. So, whoops. So this command is going to be npm install -g create -react -app. So we're going to run that command. I'll leave the notepad up for a bit. But what this is this is just going to generate some Bootstrap code for us. It's a library to generate a Bootstrap for us, a boilerplate for us, which ordinarily I don't typically care to do a tutorial by giving you some pre-generated code. I don't typically think that that's very helpful, but I know Create React App is widely used throughout the industry, and also if we weren't going to use a bootstrapper like Create React App, we would have a tough time because there's a lot of configuration for libraries like Babel and Webpack that are, in my mind, outside of the scope of today's workshop. So we're going to be using a bootstrapper. We're going to be using Create React. So hopefully you've been able to install that. The installation is fairly quick. So the next command that we're going to run is going to be create React app, as well as whatever you're going to name your project. So I'm just going to call this React Codelab. Importantly, you want to make sure that the name of your project is not the same as the name of a library you're going to be using. And so I just recommend not calling your project React. I'm just calling it React Codelab for today. So that's the command right there. Create, nope, sorry, that's create React Codelab. I want create React app. So yeah, the command is create React app with dashes in between, and then the name of your project. So I'm just going to run that. It's going to think for a bit. So it's installing the dependencies, the main dependencies, in addition to those other things that need to be configured like Babel and Webpack. It's installing React, and it's installing another library called React DOM. This is just what does the work of actually injecting your React code as HTML elements onto your page. So it's not going to do a whole lot of extra stuff. It's just going to speed up stuff that I really don't want to have to handle today. So mine's still thinking about it, so I guarantee yours is okay. Mine is done. Cool. So now I'm just going to jump into that folder that I just created with my workspace with my code. So because I called my application React-Codelab, then I'm going to jump into the React-Codelab directory on my system. So I'm going to pull that up. So I'm now in there. And now I'm going to open up my text editor. Now, because I use Atom, I have access to a shortcut to open it up, which is Atom space dot, and that'll open up Atom in the current directory. If you're using VS Code, I know it has code space dot, but I'm just going to give y'all some time to go ahead and open that up in whichever text editor you use. I'm gonna really recommend if you have some editor that supports multiple tabs, that would probably be easier than using something like Notepad or Notepad++, just because of how often we will be jumping between different files. So we've got that. I'm going to kind of crack open this source folder that we've got over here. And as you can see, it's generated a lot of stuff for us. Unfortunately, we will be able to delete most of it. So we're actually going to go in here and we are going to delete every file in the source folder except for index.js. We do not need this. So we've nuked it. And all we're left with is this index.js file. The other thing is that we don't need this whole service worker stuff at the bottom of the index.js, so we're going to kill that. And then we're actually going to kill these lines as well. So our index.js now has only 3 lines of code. It's this import React from React, import React DOM from React-DOM, and then there's this React DOM.render app, and then document.getElement by ID root. So this is all you should need. Hopefully you guys have been able to open up your directory at this point in your text editor. Hopefully you guys have been able to make those changes. Again, the only file inside your source folder that you're actually going to want is the index.js file. That's the only one you need. And then these are the only lines that that you should need. At this point, I'm going to direct you towards a few assets that we are going to be using. So we're actually going to be creating a very, very rudimentary newsfeed application for ourselves. And I've got some code up for y'all at tinyurl.com/reactassets. So I'm going to go there myself, and you'll see that there are 2 files there. There's one called posts.json, and there's one called styles.css. So we're just going to take each of these, and you can probably just download them if you want and just drag the files in, but I find it to be quicker to just copy and paste the stuff into my source folder. So now I've copied the posts.json in there, and I'm going to create a styles.css. And now I'm going to copy and paste my styles.css in there. You don't really need to do the CSS stuff. I'm not going to make it super beautiful. It's still going to be pretty ugly after all. But I've included that as just kind of a utility if you guys are interested. And I'll kind of point out when we're actually ready to use the CSS stuff. But the post.json you're definitely going to need. So again, you can pull that from tinyurl.com/reactassets. And you're going to want to stick those into your source folder that you have. If you've decided to join me in the wonderful world of using that CSS file, then in your index.js, you're just going to want to pull in that CSS file by going import./styles.css, or whatever you've called it. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create our app component. So I'm just going to go into source. I'm going to create a new file in source, and I'm going to call this app.js. Inside app.js, I'm going to go import React from string React, import, no, I don't need React. Okay. Now, over the course of today, I want to show you guys actually 2 different syntaxes that you can use to write a component. The first is called a functional component, and it's so called because it is a function. It's just a function that returns some HTML markup. It's actually not strictly HTML markup. It's a syntax extension for JavaScript called JSX, but it allows us to basically return DOM elements and other components using an XML, HTML style syntax that also allows for variables to be injected in. It's pretty nice. So a functional component is just a function that returns some JSX. So if we're here in the app.js, we're going to type const capital A app equals function, then you have your parentheses, and then you have your curly braces. I'm going to add a semicolon there, and then I'm going to come down after the curly braces and everything, and I'm going to say export default app. And again, that's with a capital A. Okay, inside this app function, we're just going to return some very, very simple JSX just to make sure that we've got everything working fine. So inside here, just type return, and then I'm going to do some parentheses with a semicolon after them, and then inside the parentheses, I'm going to do a new line. I'm going to type div hello world, and then I'm going to have this end div at the end. At this point, I save. Hopefully, all your files are now saved. You've got everything saved just fine. And now we're actually going to open up our Hello World. So we're using a tool called Webpack, which is going to do all the work of bundling up our code and then presenting it in the form of a server that we can actually access our, that'll host our code on localhost, and we can actually access that in our browser. So you want to make sure you're inside whatever you called your workspace, and you're going to run the command npm start, and I'll type that in big here. npm start. Okay, so you'll notice it jumped me straight to the browser, to localhost 3000, and if everything is working just fine, then we should be able to see, it will pop up with the text, hello world. Oh wait, actually, no, it won't do that quite yet, because we've got this app here, and we're exporting it, but we're not actually importing it in our root. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to index.js right here, and we're just going to say import, this is capital A app from /app. This is the same as saying /app.js, by the way, but I'm going to leave that JS out there. Okay, so we're importing app from /app. This will import the functional component that we exported inside app.js. So the next thing that's happening is React DOM is taking this kind of parent node, this rootmost node of our application, which is this app right here. It's this guy, the app that we just imported. It's going to take that, and it's going to render that into our page. So if you've done that, now when you go to your page, you should see Hello World right there. The nice thing about Webpack is now that it's running, it's just going to keep running, so it's going to refresh everything. Every time you save, it'll do this hot reloading, so you won't actually have to like quit the server and then run it again. Once you've got it running, it's good to go. So at this point, we have a very basic Hello World, but this is not very exciting. We're going to be creating a news feed that will have several posts in it, and ultimately we'll get to the point where we can even comment on posts. But I do want to allow a quick opportunity for a break, just in case you guys have some questions. Just making sure we've gotten everyone set up just fine so far. What's up? What did you say? Can I look at the chat? You're talking like the YouTube chat? Yeah, I can. Yeah, I think so. Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Notepad++ does have tabs. Okay, this is very good points. Thank you. Okay. Alright, so at this point, we're working again. So, cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a component to represent an individual post, right? So you think about like our newsfeed has multiple posts, and each of them will have their own content, but they'll all have the same structure, right? So that's a prime candidate to be turned into a component. So once again, in source, we're going to create a new file. I'm just going to call this post.js. All right. Inside post, once again, we're going to import React from React. And now for this one, I'm actually going to introduce the other syntax of creating a component, and this is called a class-based component. So we start with saying class post extends React.component. Hopefully for anyone with some experience with object-oriented programming, this looks familiar to y'all. We're going to have some curly braces in there. And any component that extends React.component is required to implement a function called render. And render is going to return some JSX. So render is kind of doing the same exact stuff as a functional component is doing, right? So here we're going to put in just return, we'll put in, I'll say, I'm a post. So I'm going to save that, and now we're going to actually want to render a post inside of our app component. So we're going to go back to app, we're going to say import post from /post. Once again, that's the same as importing it from the current directory's post.js folder, or file. So we've got that now, and I'm just going to expand this a bit, and we're going to add a post component. So this is using kind of that angle syntax here, right? It looks like an HTML tag, but instead of saying something like div or input, it says post, and that's a capital P. It matches the post that we have up here. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to go into our post component again. We need to say export default post. It's always tricky to make sure you're exporting and importing the right stuff. But now we have this flow of the post component is exporting itself from this file, and the app component is importing the post component, and it's using it right here. So if all of that's working fine, then we should see still our text that says hello world, but also because it's a post, it will also say I'm a post. And sure enough, we see that. Okay, but that's not really what a post looks like. A post is going to have some more intricate stuff in it, right? So in our minds, a post is going to have an avatar, a username, and contents. So an avatar would be, first of all, we need a div. And inside that div, the avatar is going to be an image. I'm just going to give it an empty source. It's self-closing tag. This is fairly standard HTML syntax here. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to specify the name, right? So this will be the name of the user. I'll say post username here. Just dummy content right now. And then I'm going to come in here with a paragraph tag, and I'm going to say this is the status of the post. And save. So now I go back to here, and you can see it says post username has a heading 1. There's a paragraph tag that says this is the status of the post. There's no image because we didn't specify a source for the image. But this is going to be the general structure of our post. Now at this point, everything has been statically generated, right? Like this is a static hard-coded string in there. This is a static hard-coded status in there. That's not interesting to us, right? We want our post to come from a source, right? And so earlier, I had you guys download this post.json. array, this JSON array from the GitHub's gist. And as you can see, it specifies multiple objects, and each object in here represents a post, right? So we've got our avatar here, we've got our name here, we've got our status here. We do have a user ID. I don't think I'm going to end up actually using that, but we have avatar, name, and status, right? So it would be really nice if we could pull in our contents of this JSON object and create posts that actually use these contents, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our app.js, and we're going to say import post list from /posts.json. Alright, so this is going to import the whole JSON array into this file as an array called post list. Okay, so now we actually want to generate a series of posts created from the posts in post list. So just above the return here, so we're still inside the function here, but it is above the return. We're going to type postlist.map. And we're actually about to use some syntax called big arrow notation. This is just a simpler way of writing functions in JavaScript. It's pretty new. It was kind of only standardized in the 2015 standards. But what this is we have a parameter name. So here we're going to use post as our parameter name. And then we're going to say equals greater than. It forms a nice little arrow here, a fat arrow. And now we're going to do some curly braces. And we can say return, and in here we're going to do post, and we're going to have a just a self-contained post right here. We're going to do a semicolon there, and now over here before where we say postlist.map, we're just going to say let posts equal postlist.map. So what this is going to do, map is going to iterate over the post list, and it's going to find each element of post list, and it's going to apply the function that we gave it to that element, right? And it's going to create a new element of the results of each of these, right? So this is going to iterate over post list, and it's going to generate a new post, and it's going to store all of those posts in a new array called posts. So what we can do here, we can actually go down to where we're doing our return div, and inside here, we can actually inject this posts array into there using curly braces. So curly braces in JSX allow us to inject variables. So posts is an array of components, and React is smart enough to treat arrays like this as just like, oh, render all of these components inside. So it's going to automatically handle this. So at this point, we're going to save, and now we're going to go back to our app here, and you can see we still have they're still all dummy content, right? They all say post username, and this is the status of the post, and they don't yet have the avatar source. But it's now generating one post, one dummy post, for every post object inside of post list. So this is good. This is definitely a start. So we now have the question to ask ourselves of how do we get information from a parent component to a child component, right? Like, how does app pass information to the posts that are inside of it? These post components. How does it do that? And React has a mechanism for this. It's called props. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to use HTML attribute syntax to pass information to the post component. So what information do we have? Well, we have the avatar, which is going to be post.avatar, right? So the post is whatever element of the array that we're looking at. It's an object, right? And when we look at here, each object has an avatar property inside of it, as well as a name property and a status property. So we can access that post avatar by saying post.avatar. So we're going to pass that in. We're also going to pass in name, which is going to be post.name. And then finally, we're going to pass in status, which is going to be post.status. And if I wanted, I could also say, for instance, pass in like a string, like foo equals hi, or whatever, right? There's no need for us to do this, so I'm going to go ahead and erase that. But that is a thing we could do. Again, we're using the curly braces syntax to inject variables into our JSX. But all of this is going to do is just pass that content into the new post component that's being created. So we can now save that. But if we go back here, you can see it's still dummy, right? Because we're not actually consuming any of those props inside the post component. So I want to go back into post.js. This is our post component. And now we're going to start making use of this. So to access a prop that is passed down to a child inside that child, we're going to use the syntax of this.props, whatever you named that prop, right? So one of the props that we passed was avatar. So now we can say this.props.avatar. And inside here, we could say this.props.name. And then down here, we're still doing curly braces, this.props.status. Again, we have to do the curly braces because, or at least for these, we have to do the curly braces because otherwise it's going to just use the literal text, this.props.name. We don't want that. We want to inject the variable into there. That's why we're using the curly braces. So I'm going to save this and go back to our application running in the browser. And as you can see, yay, we have some posts. These are actual real quotes by these people, by the way. I particularly enjoy how Alan Turing said, "We are not interested in the fact that the brain has the consistency of cold porridge." So these are real quotes. And now, if you guys are interested, we have some styles that we can apply. I invite you to just see what all these styles are. You don't have to do this, but I find it's going to make it look a lot better for me, at least. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So we're going to go back into our post component here. And on this outermost div, we're going to apply the class post-box. Now you'll notice I used the attribute class name here. If you've done any web development, you know that typically when we have CSS classes that we want to apply, we use the class attribute. However, in JavaScript, the word class is a reserved keyword, right? So we can't actually use the word class for this. So the people of React have gone with class name. So that's why we're using class name over class. And so I'm just also going to pass these classes of avatar, of name, and then I didn't actually create one for status. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And there we go. We now have, it's a lot easier to see where the individual posts are. So far, what we've been able to accomplish is we have one root component, that's our app component, and that's generating, it's pulling in a list of posts, right? And while we're pulling in from a JSON object that's just hard-coded and static, the principle is still pretty much the same as if you were to get a JSON object or a JSON array from some API, right? I just didn't want to have to deal with wiring in any API fetchers like Axios. But if that's something you're interested in, you can absolutely look it up. So we're receiving this JSON array, and then we're generating inside of the app component, we're generating a list of post components. And each post component receives the values that make it unique, right? These parameters that we call props. And each post component is taking those props and it's saying, okay, so here's how I want to render. Here's how I want it to look. And so that's how we're able to have the series of posts that all have the same structure, but their individual content is dynamic. I'll pause here for some questions if we've got any. And I'll take a look at the chat as well if we've got any. Notepad++ does have tabs still. Cool. Do we have any questions? What'd y'all say? I couldn't hear you. Do you have any questions over there? Your avatars aren't. Oh, I might not. No. Okay. If your avatars aren't round, then I would check in your styles to see if you've got border radius 50%. But ultimately, if that's not working, like that's just a CSS. That's not fundamental. What'd you say? Okay. Ultimately, if that's not working, then that's just the. Oh, actually, if your avatars aren't round, did you apply the avatar class to it? So make sure that over here where it says img class name, that you specify equals the string avatar. Make sure you spell avatar correctly. Okay, cool. Yeah, so, but that's ultimately a CSS problem more than anything React. Okay, so the next thing that we've got, right, like even though we're dynamically generating all of these posts from some list, right, like that list is all hard coded, it's static, we've done nothing interactive here. So I want to fix that. I want to add the ability for us to comment on these posts. So we're going to go back into our post component here, and we're just going to add, first of all, the HTML elements that we're going to need. So I'm going to personally, just because I prefer the aesthetic of it, I'm going to add a horizontal rule. That's the HR component or element. That's just going to add a horizontal line to it. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a text area. This is also going to be self-closing. And then last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a button. I'm going to add the text, submit comment. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to make sure everything's working over here just so that we can see it. Cool. So now every post has a text area and a submit comment. But, you know, we can type into this and we can hit submit comment all we want. Nothing's going to happen, right? We've added no logic for that. All we've added are the elements themselves. So, cool. At this point, I'm going to introduce to you guys another concept of data in React. So components can receive props from their parents, right? So that's how information can trickle down. But if a component wants to maintain data inside of itself, data that has the possibility to change and change in a way that might require a re-render, we use something called component state. So component state's going to be a little fun here. We can we'll start by adding a constructor method, and this constructor is going to receive an argument called props, and then we have to do super props. So if you're familiar with object-oriented programming and inheritance from JavaScript, or sorry, from Java, this should look pretty familiar to you, right? This whole super props thing and the constructor. This is just our way of starting off by making sure that like as our component's being initialized, it's doing all the things that it needs to do to initialize to be a component. But then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to say this.state equals, and we're going to have it be an object. And this object, we're actually going to have in it 2 bits of state. The first is going to be, we're going to have a property called comments, and we're going to have that be an array. We're also going to have a property called new comment, and we're going to have this be the empty string. The other thing that I realized I've forgotten to do is actually add a space for the comments to show up. And it's not going to be anything fancy. We're just going to have it be an unordered list. So we're going to go back here inside our render function, and underneath the horizontal rule, we're just going to have an unordered list there. And I'll even add some spaces there. Here, I'll just give us some more room so we can better see what's going on here. Okay. And so, I specified earlier that we're going to have an empty array, but I want to start off with a few comments just so that y'all can see that this is for sure working. So, I'm just going to specify 2 strings in there. Hello, goodbye. Right? Now, inside render, we can access these state properties by saying this.state.comments or this.state.new comment. And what we want to do is we want to iterate over the current set of comments that we have, and we want to generate a list item for each one of those comments. So, what I am going to do is I'm going to say let comments equal, and once again we're going to use map, so we're going to say this.state.comments.map. So this is going to iterate over the entire comments array, the this.state.comments array. We're going to pass it a comment, big arrow, notation, curly braces. We're going to say return list item, and inside that list item we're going to inject comment, right? And comment is the name of the parameter that we've given here. So it's going to look first of all at the string hello, and it's going to return a list item with the string hello. Then it's going to look at goodbye, and it'll return a list item that says goodbye. And both of those will be put into a comment, or put into an array, and we call that array comments. So now we can go back into our unordered list here, and we can inject the comments array into there. Again, curly braces for injecting. So it will take this array that's been generated here of list items with each of the comments, and it'll just inject each of those. And now we refresh, and as you can see, it's generating these list items there. And right now, because everything's hard-coded, we have our comments hard-coded into the state. All of them say hello, goodbye. Our next move is going to be to remove that, so that way we're just dealing with comments for each post individually. But I want to give y'all a second to just kind of catch up and ask any questions if you're having any issues. Okay. Awesome. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to nuke the 2 strings inside of comments. So we're going to start with a fresh set of comments. And now what we will do is so let's create a function for what we do when this text box changes. So the React components have what we call a lifecycle. So let me look this up just so that y'all can see. It's always good to take a look at the docs. But the component lifecycle has 3 main phases. There's when the component mounts. That's when it's being first added into the the page. So that's when it does its initial render. Then there's the updating phase. So that's if the props that it receives are changed, or if you make changes to state. It'll force an update and it'll re-render. And then the final phase is unmounting. That's as you remove it from the page. And that's just you'll use lifecycle methods in unmounting for just kind of doing some cleanup. You don't have to use all of these, but there we go. These are the three phases. You're not going to have to use all of these, and you're not going to have to use all the lifecycle methods inside of them, but they're useful to keep in mind. We're already using two lifecycle methods, constructor and render. These are called at various parts of the process. So constructor is the first method that's called during the mounting phase, and then render is called during mounting and during the updating phase. So this is important because it means that if we make any changes, like if a parent makes any changes to the props, or if the component makes any changes to its own state, this is going to trigger a re-render. This is really cool because right now we're handling the comments there, and we're rendering each of the comments. So if we can make changes to this.state.comments, then it'll trigger a re-render and show the new contents of the comments array. But the way we're going to do this, the way that we're going to kind of keep track of state and add stuff in there, is we're going to create what's called a controlled element. And this is where the value of a field, a form field, is being maintained by the React component state. So we're going to start off by going into this text area component that we've got over here. And we're going to type value equals this.state.new comment. Now we're calling this new comment because we called it new comment up here. So the value of this text area, the contents inside of the text area, are going to be equal to this.state.new comment. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back into our application over here. I'm going to start typing, right? I'm going to comment on Grace Hopper's post. As you can see, I can't type. That's a bit frustrating. So what's happening here? Well, because we've associated the value to this empty string, that means that's always going to be what the value is. We're associating it with this.state.new comment, which is currently always an empty string. So no matter what we type in there, the value is not going to change because it's not paying attention to what we do to change anything. It's paying attention to this.state.new comment. So we need a way to figure out when a user is trying to type into the text area, and we're going to store the stuff that they're typing into this.state.new comment. So first of all, we'll create a new function over here. I'm going to call it onType, and I'm going to make it a function with a parameter called event. And inside onType, what we're going to do is we're going to say this.setState, and in it we're going to pass it an object, right? And this object is going to be every property on our component state that we want to update, as well as what the new value should be. So we want the new comment property to update. So we're going to say new comment. Notice, by the way, that we're in an object here. We've got these curly braces, right? So this.setState is a function. We've got these parentheses, but we're passing it an object. And the value of new comment is going to be, and this is actually some standard JavaScript, but the event that's being generated that we get through this parameter, it has a target, and that target is the text area. And then the text area has a value. So this is going to take whatever the contents that the user is trying to type into the text area. It's going to assign that to the new comment property inside state. And you might be asking yourself, well, if we've got this.state object here, then why do we need to use setState? why can't I just say this.state.new comment equals and overwrite it? Well, if you do that, then React has no way of knowing that you've actually tried to change state, and so it can't trigger the whole lifecycle stuff. So we have to use set state so that React knows that, hey, we need to actually start updating stuff. This is good practice. You should only ever directly set state inside of constructor. Outside of constructor, you should always use this.set state. Okay. The next thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to go inside of our constructor, and this is going to be a lot of fun here. We're going to type this.onType, that's the name of our function here, equals this.onType.bind, and that's a function that we're going to pass the this context to. This is because even in JavaScript, classes are still technically functions. In JavaScript, everything is messy and everything is technically a function, which is technically an object. It's super messy. But because classes are technically functions and not really first-class citizens like we would expect in Java, that means the scoping of this gets really, really messy. And without doing this right here, without binding the onType function here to the component, like we're doing here, we would never be able to use this.setState. So if we want to use this.setState, or even really anything to do with this inside of onType, then we have to do the binding here. It's a bit frustrating, but it is what it is. So at this point, we have now bound this our onType function, and we're just going to pass that to the text area component. So we've got an onChange. That's camel case, by the way. The onChange property. We're just going to inject this.onType. So now we've got text area onChange equals this.onType, and the value is this.state.newComment. And onType, every time the text area changes when someone's typing into it, then set state is going to be called updating new comment with the new contents of the text area. So we save, we go back into our page here, and as you can see, typing has been restored. So why do we do all this, right? Why do we need this controlled component? Well, now we have the contents of the text area stored in state. And so we can start to use this elsewhere. Like, for instance, if we need to submit our comment. So we're going to create a new function called submitComment. And this is actually also going to receive an event, though we don't need that to. Yeah, we don't need the event. Okay, so now we've got our submitComment. We're just going to go ahead and also bind the this.submitComment up here. It's going to be the same syntax. This.submitComment.bind, pass bind this. Cool. Alright, so now what we're going to do in here is we're actually going to update inside submitComment. We're going to update the comments array to have the new comment inside of it. So once again, we're making a change to state, so we're going to do this.setState, and we're going to pass another object to it. And inside, we're going to pass comments. And comments is going to be an array. And first of all, it needs to maintain all the contents of the comments so far, right? So we're going to copy over the comments from previously that we already have in this.state.comments. We're going to use something called the spread notation for this. So this is ... this.state.comments. So that will copy over all the contents of the current comments array into this array. And then at the end, so we want a comma, we're just going to append the current comment box contents. So we are storing that in this.state.newComment. So that's this.state.newComment, like that. Okay, now we've got this submitComment function written. I'm gonna try, yeah, I can leave that up there for now. And we're gonna go to our button, and we're gonna give it an onClick. Again, that's camel case, onClick. We're gonna pass it using the curly brace injection, this.submitComment, and save. So hopefully, what this will do is every time you click the button, the submit comment button, it will call our submit comment function, which will update the state, specifically the comments array inside of the state, adding the new comment to the end of it. So I'm going to save that. We're going to go over here, and we're going to go ahead and try to submit a comment. As you can see, that works. Interesting. So the hello world bit in there stays, right? Like that's still part of the text area, which isn't, like if I were using a social network like this, that's not expected behavior for me. I would expect that the contents of the text area would get wiped. Well, how do we do that? Well, we can just make a change to the bit of state, right? So we're just going to go into the submit comment, and we're just going to add a new line here. We're going to say new comment should just become an empty array here. So we save that, we refresh, and every time you refresh, you're going to lose all the local component state because it's completely regenerating everything. So this would be a great argument for having some sort of like either local storage or, in reality, your submit comment button would probably make an API post call rather than just storing everything in a component state. But that's just something to keep in mind, right? Every time you refresh the page, you're going to lose all of your local component state. So now we can go to hello world, we can submit comment, our comment box is wiped, and we now have ourselves a functioning comment page created in React. Do we have any final questions? Okay. Um, so I do want to also point out, right? Like React is not the end of it. There are a ton of other libraries that are built in to help with this, right? Like, each component is maintaining its own local state, but inside a bigger application like Facebook, for instance, you might have a lot of components that need access to the same pieces of state. And you want it in a way where it's not like they're all trying to locally maintain their own copy, because then you have multiple sources of truth that might be out of date. So there are libraries like, for instance, Redux that are designed to bring the state to one kind of external source of truth, right? So there's a lot more that you can do with this. This is just kind of to show you an introductory, like how do components work, how can you use them in an application, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just kind of what this has been for. Um, hopefully this helps. Hopefully this helps you get excited about maybe some projects that you can do with React in the future. Yeah. Anything else? Hey, you're welcome. If you guys need to reach me, you can reach me at ben.myers@okstate.edu. I think I have the slide up now. But just go ahead and reach out to me. Ask me if you have any questions. If you do anything with React or anything inspired by anything that you've seen here, go ahead and email it to me or send me your GitHub repo. I'd love to see that. If you have any further questions about React, I recommend you can ask me, or I also recommend going to the React documentation. Now is a really exciting time to be a React developer. React 16 is currently coming out, and there are a whole lot of new features that really simplify a lot of stuff and add a whole lot more powerful functionality. So it's an exciting time to get started. Uh, thank. Have a good one.